Welcome everyone to Not Another Whiskey Podcast. Mitch here. Thanks for joining us for this extra episode. Daz and I head along to the Holyrood Distillery where we sat down with the managing director, Nick Ravenhall, and the distillery manager, Mark Watson. So here it is, guys. Enjoy and thanks for tuning in. All right, guys, so we're here at the Holyrood Distillery with Nick Ravenhall and Mark Watson. So Nick is the managing director here who has a CV that's probably the same size as yours and mine combined as.
Yes.
So give you a little bit of background about Nick sitting here, and I'm going to do this because I've heard Nick's introductions to himself before, so I'm going to do his introduction for him.
I thought this was a punchy episode.
There you go. Exactly, man. That's why I'm trying to make it a punchy episode.
I'll be back in 20 minutes.
So Nick hails from New Zealand originally, a bartender over there, who then started working for Diageo. Diageo then brought him over to Edinburgh at the same time as Daz and I were working for Diageo.
Way back in the day.
I actually think Nick and I started on the same day.
Yeah, we
really?
did.
We
did.
Exactly the same day,
So Nick was a sales rep running about the whole of Scotland, literally got handed this territory when he arrived, and he was like, where the fuck am I going? And then ran about Scotland for the whole time, right, essentially?
I had to ask whereabouts in Edinburgh Dundee was. That's how, that's how green I was.
Following on from a stint with Diageo, he went over to Attenbrands and was the managing director there, and now he is the managing director for the Holyrood Distillery. So we're also joined by Mr. Mark Watson, who has a little bit of distilling experience, working at the Bonington Distillery previously, which is Krabby's whiskey, for those that don't know what the Bonington whiskey distillery is. And he also worked at Eden Mill. Am I right, Mark? That's your kind of CV with regards to distilling?
Yeah, and then top it off with Shetland Rio up in Shetland for good measure with Stuart Nickerson. So yeah.
Did you work up there?
Yeah, I worked up there.
I
worked up there with Stuart. Yeah, it was amazing.
You can see the PTSD on the young man here.
Just when the wind blows.
What is it? Insta or Unist?
It was on Stuart.
Unst, isn't it? Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, that was a crazy car journey where Stuart was like, "Oh, come work for us," and I got on a 13-hour ferry, and then it's a tour car journey, and then it's another ferry, and then another ferry, and then a 30-minute car journey, and I was like, "Oh, where am I?" It's incredible.
But he's a bit of a legend. He was the distillery director at Grant's. Worked at Highland Park back in the 80s.
Yeah, Brett brought back Glassa.
Yeah.
He ran that tiny gin distillery, and still runs it like somebody that's completely obsessed with spirit quality, and it's amazing to learn from. It was incredible to learn from because he was just like, here's how we record stuff, here's how we measure stuff, here's you've dropped a bucket. And it just everything was meticulous attention to detail. So it was an incredible place to actually learn. I don't think it would be the distiller I am today without learning from Stuart. Nice. It was amazing.
He's got a great reputation. I sat next to him at a dinner once, can't remember what it was, Spirit Speyside Festival or something like that, and I didn't say a word, I just listened. You know, it just kept going and going, and I was like, man, this boy, and he knows his stuff.
Well, gents, thank you very much for firstly having us at the Holyrood Distillery.
Welcome.
And secondly for your time. I know you're both busy men, so we appreciate that.
Yeah. I wanted to start off with the significance of distilling in Edinburgh, right? As somebody who's lived here for 15 plus years, you hear about all the tales of closed distilleries and things like that, and Edinburgh's got such a rich heritage in terms of distilling. We just did an episode on the Lowlands and we talked a little bit about it. But single malt whiskey in Edinburgh, what is the significance of it in terms of the Holyrood story and what you guys have achieved to date?
I mean, when we started to look at Edinburgh as the central piece for our distilling story, it didn't take long to figure out that there wasn't that much to say in terms of single malt quality, single malt history of anything that was inspirational and of note. And then when we kind of were looking at that, it became really apparent that we've got to stop looking at Holyrood as just another Scottish single malt whiskey distillery that's in Edinburgh, which is in the Lowlands, and that we had a unique opportunity just to take a step back and go, we've got the same challenges in front of us as almost any other New World distiller. Now, I know we're not New World, but we're breaking new ground, if that makes sense. And so we kind of took that mindset into, okay, well, if we were to look at this as a clean slate for Edinburgh and a clean slate as a distillery, how do we pay respect to the past, but also be very anchored in the present and in the future. And then, distilling and whiskey making is so connected with the locality of where it's from and the history and tradition in this country. We had to think about, well, what could we take from the city? What was part of the city's DNA and heritage that would give us authenticity in our making journey? Like, I think the hardest thing to strive for as a new distillery, particularly in Scotland, is what's your integrity as a whiskey maker? And so we've got a mission which you and I call Earning Our Whiskey Stripes, which is a lot about how do we add to the Scotch whiskey legacy. So Edinburgh just gives us an anchoring point where we can start to build our production mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so when you look around the landscape in Edinburgh, there's 16 boreholes around here.
Yeah,
it's all brewing. You look at shilling recipes, you look at Youngers, you look at the Charm Circle, which is the aquifer which sits underneath Arthur's Seat. They're all really big clues about what we should be looking at as distillers.
Yeah.
And so if we take a new world mindset, it just goes, great. Well, here's a new space for us to explore.
Yeah.
And you and I built that out together, talking a lot about beer and our shared beer journey over the years.
But it makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, I think
like, here's a city that's made. Think of Duker's IPA. That beer, how many awards has it won, right? Yeah. It's mad. And now you've got brands like Innocent Gun, and there's all these great Edinburgh beers that are now drunk all over the world. Surely, if you make great beer, you make great whiskey. Is that not how it works? Is it not
I would love. Jesus, it's going to be a long episode. I think it gives us an incredible starting point in both looking at old Youngers. Like, Shut Up About Barclay Perkins is one of Nick and I's absolute favourite beer blogs, just for the amount of detail and record keeping that people kept, that people explore, that people are still super interested in, that are developing beer within this city, within within Scotland. And I think when we tie that back to our distilling and what we want to do, it just gives us an incredible platform to be unburdened and to go chasing yeast strains, to go chasing specialty malt, to go chasing long fermentation styles or completely different distillation techniques based around flavour profiles and based around just old beer and how its relationship with the city changed and developed over time. I think the most exciting thing about that is that it's so nuanced. You alluded to Edinburgh Whisky and that there's some things of note. I mean, North British being the brightest star of it. There's a couple of other distilleries in there that, brands and things perpetuate. And in Edinburgh, we saw one of the biggest storages of malt and whiskey in the entire world at one point in Leith. And then it just dissipated and kind of left. And, VAT 69 left and all these things just sort of dissipated from the city when it developed and sort of grew. And I think the exciting thing for us is that we can grow back into the city, that we can grow whiskey back into the city in the organic way that it has changed and peaked and troughed with beer and now with spirits again. So I think going back to your original question about Edinburgh, I think for us it's the tie that binds, but it's so freeing because there's so much there to play with and to talk and develop.
It's interesting because you, Nick, mentioned it behaving like a new world distillery. I was chatting to the guys at Westland a few weeks ago. They were up for the whiskey show. They'd come over and we sat tasted some of the whiskies with them and actually they laid down a bit of a gauntlet and they said focusing on barley, focusing on yeast strains, focusing on fermentation times, the early stages of production are so important. And they actually were quite open and said, you guys in Scotland, you've maybe forgotten about that. And I loved that challenge set by them, who are quite like you guys, it sounds, thinking of those earlier stages a little bit more than maybe some of the other distilleries are in Scotland, perhaps.
I mean, it's a gauntlet, but it's also true in our opinion. And we look to the crew over there as a little bit of inspiration. New World does inform how we think about the mindset that you've got to have in this space. And so when it comes back to all of these anchors that the anchor of brewing, which is sitting on the locality of Edinburgh, as Mark says, it's a starting point for us just to start having a conversation from a Scotch whisky maker's perspective. And I think when we're looking to how we're going to move forward as a distillery, having those conversations, I mean, we're really lucky that we're a small distillery and we've got a very flexible piece of kit because we can. It doesn't cost us a lot of money in terms of time and effort to look at iterations. We're not locked into a 12-year-old maturation profile that we need to deliver year after year after year after year. We get this wonderful opportunity that we only have now because we're at startup, where we do get to behave a lot different to the rest of our senior colleagues within Scotch whisky making.
Nice.
So a question for you guys. So going back to your history, your very short history, summer 2019 is when Holyrood opened up. So you guys have got legal whiskey now, right?
Next year.
It's next year. My maths is terrible.
Bad maths. A year on September the 13th.
Is it?
Yeah, or last September 13th. So that's when the first cask comes of age, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. First casks are always a bit weird. But then the rest of our production comes in October for those sort of tranches, and then it starts to flow through into January and February. But with those early laydowns, the very first iteration of what Nick and I are talking about now in the exploration was intentionally / unintentionally laid down, and that is amazing for us that we've got the very starting blocks of what we're talking about here, that the brewing side of things, the attention to detail, the yeast strains, the development of style, or various styles, were all laid down then. Now the plan has changed a million times and will continue to change and adapt, but for us, we're very lucky to look back in those stocks and see that the very first formation of the idea that we're now properly leaning into was formed then, and then we have something to use and something to take from there and continue to run with it. Yeah,
that's what I'm quite excited about, because if I went to Campbelltown, I think I could tell you what a Campbelltown whiskey could and maybe should be like. In your eyes, then, what does an Edinburgh single malt whiskey look like? A good one, not one of these ones that was slated in the past for maybe not being as good as they could have been back in the 20s and 1800s and things like that.
I mean, I think there is a piece there where the whiskey we are making now needs to reflect the culture of this city. And, as an outsider and coming into Edinburgh in 2007, one of the most striking things for me was the history and modernity live side by side, and that this is a very progressive city. There's always debate, like if you go out for a beer with someone, the chat's fantastic because you talk about things, you talk about real things. And I think there is a curiosity that is inherent within the people who live here. There is an openness, there is a progressiveness, and our whiskey needs to reflect that. And that's where, these ideas of iteration are really, really important. We want to have conversations which say, you talk about this all the time, I want to share my homework. And when Mark's making his whiskey and laying down the ideas, what we want to do is be very open about how we make things, why we make things, why we're investigating brewing, why we're investigating specialty malt, what's the role of heritage barley, how do these fermentations work. So rather than having a top-down conversation where a brand says, this is our whiskey, this is how it's made, and this is how you drink it. It is, this is what we did. This is what we're seeing right now. What do you think of what we're seeing? Because there's so much new information that we're uncovering all the time, and that's not a style. Like, people ask us all the time, what's your core range? I'm like, there's no fucking core range. Like, our period of iteration is now, and we don't even know if we'll ever stop it because there's so much to learn from. And I think that for me, as a random Kiwi up here, is a really respectful way of honouring the city, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So I think what you're saying there, isn't it? When you guys are going to release some whiskey, it's going to be very much different releases when it comes out, different cask finishes, everything kind of changing almost. Is that going to be like a single cask release? Is that the plan?
Can
you guys not tell us that?
No, we can share. I mean, we don't know.
We don't know. I think like one of the greatest freedoms that like I've experienced, Nick and I have talked about this a long time from when we were making beer together, is being able to say, I don't know, I'm not sure, let's try this. I'm not sure, that didn't work. And I feel like those are kind of phrases that are, much like you said before about what Wesson said, sort of forgotten, because you said what Campbelltown whiskey should taste like. That I have a problem with the word "should" in there, because it lacks the expression of what it's meant or could taste like, and I think that's the exciting bit for us now, is what is this meant to taste like for us, not for because it's supposed to taste like that. It's what is it meant to taste like for us that helps us learn something, helps us develop something, and helps us with that next iterative thing of going, okay, that heritage malt in that cask variety with that yeast and that fermentation time did not work. It's not right. It's something unbalanced about it. Okay, what are the bits we like about it? What are the bits we don't like about it? Let's take it, just deconstruct it, put it back together again into a place that we're happy with it, we learn something from it. And I think putting a core as part of that totally puts chains around the actual freedom of expression that we're talking about here, and the iterative quality of learning. And I think when we start to develop that, every time somebody's asked us, we're like, we don't know. We think it goes like this. We think it goes like that, and
we
helps.
can give it it's a really simple model, right? Like, what's the anchor? Edinburgh and brewing. And the brewing's there because of our past, but also things like Heriot Watt because of our future. And then when we look at the liquid which is coming out, there's 3 modules which are being explored: heritage malt, specialty, and yeast. Now, as they go, I'm trying to clarify this right now for the listeners, because we will tell those stories. We will share those starting points. Like, you've got the new make sitting in front of you, and we're very clear on what is showing what. Like, is this a specialty malt expression? And some of those might go on their own journey, where we end up with a choc malt on first fill Oloroso, which is like, holy hell, we need to get this out there now because this is just really special. Single cast, let it go. But then what could that look like with a heritage malt? We're looking at stuff that we're getting from Chevalier right now. And heritage malt's crappy yield, but incredible texture. So how can we stare those two back together? It's still a single malt from Holyrood, but it's a combination of 2 ideas. So I'd say what you can expect is full transparency on the releases and a red line from the starting point all the way through, because there's new information here, and we want whiskey people to grow with us, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. I think it's so exciting for you guys, because you are such a small distillery and a new distillery, being able to mess around that way. It must be an absolute joy for you, Mark, right?
Yeah, it can be one of the most the most freeing and creative places to work, and also absolutely terrifying at the same time when things aren't working or the yields come back and you're like, no, it's not about that. It's about how this ties back to us, about how we tie this back to brewing, or how we tie this back to a specific thing that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And I think this one, like the new make that we've just put out here, tells the story about how we got to the Made by Edinburgh cask launch this year.
Yeah, it does.
That's the whole purpose of it, is the iterative nature of like, right, okay, it has to be connected to how we view ourselves, and that is brewers and distillers. Mm-hmm. And so the first bit is, right, okay, let's use a more traditional mash bill. I'm saying that with because it's 100% pot still malt, just regular barley. Then we use brewers and distillers yeast, and the flavours that we got from that. And then we were like, okay, let's look at this old 80 shilling Younger's recipe. What had that in it? Oh, it had crystal, and it had dark malt in it. Right? Okay, well, dark malt, what does that look like for us? So crystal is still available. Let's go out and get crystal. Let's make a crystal version of that. Let's make a chocolate version of that. And then from the essence of all of that, we put all 3 together and made our Made by Edinburgh stuff. And then to top that all off, we were looking at yeast strains to do with this. And I think tying that back to, we used the Edinburgh ale yeast for that. And I think tying that back to the flavour profiles that you kind of alluded to before, of like what is Old Edinburgh for distilling? Well, Old Edinburgh for brewing was super collaborative, and there was no fridges, and there was no there was no storage of yeast. So they cropped yeast. Some of their neighbours came round. They were like, "Have you guys got fresh yeast?" "Yeah, we've got fresh yeast." Wheelbarrow round to another brewery, and that's where Edinburgh ale yeast came from. And just to have that little pinch of collaborative thing is a great reminder for us that it's the work's never done on it either. It's constantly iterative.
And you're not going back that long. I remember working up at Macallan, and they wrote their 6 pillars the first time, I think, in 1998. And on their 6 pillars was Golden Promise barley, a cocktail of yeasts, brewers and distillers. I think they still had direct fire stills, or they had 1 or 2 left up there at that time. And I think of that as, actually, think how much has changed in 25 years at malt distilleries. And it's all of these little things that have all been standardised across so many distilleries. And the challenge is that through that you create a homogenisation of flavour. And ultimately what you guys are saying is, this is about flavour, right? I mean, we know what you're saying. The inspirations come from what you guys know of Edinburgh beers, what's possible here at this distillery because of the mad stuff that you guys can do, which has been designed for. But all of that ultimately comes down to, what do you create in the end? And that is definitely against the tide, right? And most people are standardising, they're looking for yield, they're looking for that consistency, which is a sweary word sometimes, isn't it? It's but that's not what you're looking to do.
No, it absolutely isn't, and I think we've got to have a lot of faith in the new whiskey fan that you have now. Like, you guys remember we started flogging whiskey not that long ago.
No, and nobody wanted it, right?
And 100%. I couldn't sell Yamazaki. That was that was absolutely mental. And now when you speak to particularly younger whiskey fans coming through, they're tooled up with knowledge, and they're really, really interested in things like whiskies from the 60s and the 70s are out of their price range. They can only just imagine what these older styles look like, and we're not doing a Thompson thing here. The Thompson boys are doing a great job going back into that old space, but I think there are a few of us in the industry now who are just re-examining old information and bringing it forward so that it's there for us all to see and go, well, actually, what can these things do? You're right, we're driving for flavour, but at the end of the day, we're just trying to make the best whiskey that we can. And not putting, like you said, handcuffs on it, really being explorative and then going, okay, cool, well, everyone's loving this chocolate malt. This is a direction that we'll keep going down.
Very cool. So I want to move away from production for just a second. Sorry, Mark.
Absolutely fine.
You're finished, bro.
See you guys later.
Do you want to go get us another coffee? But no, I think a big thing about Holyrood, right, is you guys are right in the centre of Edinburgh. The foot traffic here must be unbelievable when we get back to normal kind of tourism levels, I suppose. So what is the plan? I mean, you guys have an amazing experience here already with regards to the tour. What's the plan in notching that up and moving forward and progressing with that?
Well, there's going to be some change. And one of the things that Holyrood first set out to do was teaching visitors how flavour was built. And our message and our journey has changed from that starting point. And really what we're going to do on our tour now is just we want to become Edinburgh's local. That's what we're really hungry for. We want to see Edinburgh folk in here. We don't want to just see tourists walking by. The space that we're sitting in now, we want to turn this into a highball bar, neighbourhood bar that people can come into and just enjoy and be part of the cultural landscape of the city. And so that means, there's a lot of work which is being done by Debs and her team about, well, if we're going to be local, what local things can we do? One of her ideas, which she's looking at for early next year, is to do an event called the Mashup, and that's bringing local brewers together and local distillers together and just having a liquid fair where we can speak to the community and invite people in and to have a good time. Equally, she wants to do a Christmas fair called Made by Edinburgh and bring in local Edinburgh makers. So just really start to celebrate the city and be engaged with it. So.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? I think because there's so many tourists, 2.5 million tourists a year, come to Edinburgh. Obviously, that's attractive from an experiential perspective. But I've been here, I live in Edinburgh 3, 4, 5 times, something like that, over the period, dropped in for tours, coming for a nosy, brought people down and things. And actually, even as I walk around, sometimes I'm quite surprised just listening to people going, have you been down to Holyrood?
Yeah.
And they haven't been down.
No.
And I'm like, that's a crime, almost, because you've got something here on your doorstep, which is so cool. And if you're into booze, specifically whiskey is how I see it, but I know you make gin as well, but I always just think of the whiskey stuff. And I'm like, you have to get down there. You have to go and see these stills, see the setup these guys have done, because it's super, super cool, But
it's also on us to reach out. And one of the things which happened was that the whole mindset here originally was tourists.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, tourists will find us.
Hey, locals are nice too, man.
Yeah, locals. if we do the best thing by the community, we're going to get the tourists anyway, because you're going to get recommended by the locals to come down. And it's not just about getting people through the distillery and experiencing it. We've got, you called out the gin still, which is now our pilot kit that we've got out there. This city is so vibrant in terms of the intelligence in the trade, with liquid being made by bartenders and small distillers and brewers alike. We've got a kit there which we're using for all of our iterations now. You're playing around with it, and we've taken a view that we want to open that up and reach out into the community and say, okay, well, if you've got an idea, come down, we'll work with you, we can develop it, we can play with it, and just really become part of the landscape here.
Nice. It's a good idea. I've got a packet of salt and vinegar Pringles.
We'll do it.
I'd quite like to distill. Yeah. So how can I drink them?
Yeah. I'll connect you to Mark.
If there's someone that can do it, I can do it. Yeah.
We'll do it. My favourite ever thing is Trebor Extra Strong Mints.
Right.
They distilled incredibly. You can't drink it because your eyes are watering because it's so minty, but the smell of them are absolutely amazing. But I think there's space for that to really feel like a home away from home for makers. Is I think really exciting for Nick and I, because we brewed beer at somebody else's brewery for the longest time, and it never really felt like we were just there, we're just renting a space and making stuff. But we really want people to, when they're coming here and they're making stuff with us, to feel like it's their home away from home when they're making stuff with us, and I think that's very exciting to have in the city.
Well, Mark, Nick, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great chatting to you guys, and always great coming to the distillery here. Highly recommend it to anyone listening. If you're in Edinburgh, pop along to the Holyrood Distillery. Thanks very much, guys.
Yeah, absolutely, and highly recommend Mark's coffee as well if you're popping by.
Wow. Okay, I'll take that. If it's one thing that is, it's I make a good cup of coffee.
It'll
keep you awake.